Did you know that foreign investors are quietly funding lawsuits in American courts through a practice called third-party litigation funding? Shadowy overseas funders are paying to sue American companies in our courts, and they don't pay a dime in U.S. taxes if there is an award or settlement. They profit tax-free from our legal system, while U.S. companies are tied up in court, and American families pay the price, to the tune of $5,000 a year. But there is a solution. A new proposal before Congress would close this loophole and ensure these foreign investors pay taxes, just like the actual plaintiffs have to. It's a common-sense move that discourages frivolous and abusive lawsuits and redirects resources back into American jobs, innovation, and growth. Only President Trump and congressional Republicans can deliver this win for America and hold these foreign investors accountable. Contact your lawmakers today and demand they take a stand to end foreign-funded litigation abuse.
This podcast is brought to you by Aura. By the time you hear about a data breach, your information has already been exposed for months. On average, companies take 277 days to report a breach. That's 9 months where hackers have access to your personal data. That's why we're thrilled to partner with Aura. Aura is an all-in-one digital safety solution that monitors the dark web for your phone number, email, and social security number, sending real-time alerts if your info is found. It also includes a VPN, password manager, and data broker removal to help keep you safe. For a limited time, Aura is offering a 14-day free trial plus a dark web scan to check if your personal information has been leaked, all for free at aura.com/safety. That's aura.com/safety to sign up and protect your loved ones. That's AURA.com/safety. Terms apply. Check the site for details.
Welcome to the Explaining History podcast. I just want to kind of do a little something. It's kind of fun in a way of venting a few frustrations. But it's about placing, current sort of discourse in a longer historical kind of context, and it's kind of stimulated by a few conversations I've had recently about, and people have asked me a bit about kind of what you might call this sort of confected thing of anti-wokeness, or the concept of wokeness. Obviously, the way in which the language of woke, or this term woke, sort of has kind of arrived in popular discourse, is that it actually kind of the terminology of Black power and Black liberation, and it's a kind of really kind of important concept, particularly to subaltern and oppressed groups. Is the idea that, are you kind of awake to your own exploitation, or are you kind of passively participating in that exploitation by believing what it is a dominant group is telling you, and therefore kind of unwittingly participating in your and other people's oppression? Now that's where the term kind of comes from, and it comes from the kind of the Black Power struggles of the 60s and the 70s, and sort of it emerges from there. And the idea of being awake or asleep is kind of derived in part from kind of Marxist ideas of, false consciousness, that the working classes essentially have false consciousness of the bourgeoisie, of the kind of the oppressor group upon them, and they tend to, when they are not kind of educated in a kind of a revolutionary consciousness, believe the sort of the thoughts and ideas that the dominant group would have them believe. You know, Marx said that in capitalism, the um, the culture, whatever the culture of the day is the culture that is created by the dominant group. So the dominant culture of the day, the culture of the day is the dominant group's culture that serves their interests. Okay, that's kind of where that is, and it, woke got sort of captured by the kind of American, um, firstly kind of conservative and then far right in, I think, probably the 2000s, as a sort of a term of abuse. It's like an inverted term to kind of ridicule and mock progressive ideas in general. And then it got transported around the world. So what tends to happen is that British right wing think tanks, and I'm sure Australian ones and other European ones, um, basically right wing think tanks from the wealthy world go to America, and they go to, conventions where new strategies for creating confected culture wars are discussed. It's all really quite conscious. Um, the kind of moral panic around trans rights, which was a non-issue several years ago, of which most people paid no attention to all. It affects a tiny, tiny, tiny number of people in the UK. Suddenly became this cause célèbre that the tabloid press loved to shriek and shout about. A classic example, if one looks at and this isn't to take a slight step away from the question of culture wars, but the question of, in Britain, of European Union membership, again in 2015 is barely discussed, and in the years before that it's a non-issue, and a massive relentless propaganda campaign by newspapers owned by a billionaire class brings it front and center in 2016 with predictably disastrous results. So it's possible to make something out of nothing in terms of public discourse. You just have to be prepared to throw money at it, and we obviously are ruled by people that are happy to do that. There is, as a kind of a bit of tabloid theatre, though, there is nothing new about the question of wokeness or anti-wokeness. If you rewind to the 1980s and the 1990s, it would have simply been referred to as political correctness. If you go further back, there are a whole host of anxieties on the political right in the 1970s about the counterculture. The counterculture in America in the 1970s is, as a result of the unpopularity of the Vietnam War and the successes of the civil rights movement, was on the verge of some historic successes, and a coordinated assault, and doesn't just involve the Republican right in America. The Democrat Party was a chief kind of instigator of this too. There was a coordinated assault on the counterculture. It was criminalized. It was from sort of 68 onwards. Um, it was marginalized. The ideas that kind of stem from it, from women's rights to racial minority, civil rights to gay rights, environmentalism, pacifism, all other kind of progressive ideas come under a sustained intellectual assault. There was a fantastic podcast I did probably last year now with a brilliant academic Lauren Lesage Shepherd about the development of kind of schools of conservatism in right-wing circles on American campuses. Conservatism itself at that time is less about this kind of Burkean idea of the conservation of institutions and our natural wariness around revolutions and the desire for progressive over radical change and all that kind of stuff. It's really about the conservation of wealth and power in small white elite groups, and that's it. So whenever there are challenges to the established order of things, we see periods of the most aggressive and vocal fightbacks. In the 1990s, there's less. These culture wars, they're kind of there, but they're culture skirmishes really, because there's not a lot of need for them. The post-Cold War world for a decade, particularly if you're in the wealthier part of the world, is doing quite nicely. There is a kind of an overall economic boom, and there are relative good times that where the questions of austerity that aren't really there on the public table. I mean, of course, there are harsher. The governments like that of Clinton and Blair are, relatively brutal towards poor people. But the idea that society is in some kind of great cultural struggle in the 1990s, I think, isn't really there. Obviously, there were some kind of, in the 90s and the 2000s here in Great Britain, questions around things like equal marriage were resolved in a progressive way. And actually, when you look at the data on public attitudes towards minority groups, towards gay and lesbian people, even towards trans people, all the data suggests that most people in Britain aren't remotely concerned about this sort of imagined tabloid threat about trans people, whatever it is they're supposed to have done, which I can't quite fathom myself. Attitudes are, if you were to follow social media too closely, or you were to follow the tabloid newspapers or their TV equivalents, you would have to assume that most people in Britain are utterly fascistic, and there's not a great deal of evidence to suggest that. Similarly, all the data on kind of attitudes in America, despite Trump's victory, show that attitudes towards gay and lesbian people are continuing to be more and more progressive, that whatever backlash there has been over women's rights is kind of a fairly small and marginalized thing amongst certain online groups, that racist attitudes continue to decline. Most people, and this isn't saying anything sort of particularly outlandish or optimistic about people in general, but over time, as people become more educated and affluent, and the trend is still gradually improving.
Did you know that foreign investors are quietly funding lawsuits in American courts through a practice called third-party litigation funding? Shadowy overseas funders are paying to sue American companies in our courts, and they don't pay a dime in U.S. taxes if there is an award or settlement. They profit tax-free from our legal system, while U.S. companies are tied up in court and American families pay the price. to the tune of $5,000 a year. But there is a solution. A new proposal before Congress would close this loophole and ensure these foreign investors pay taxes, just like the actual plaintiffs have to. It's a common sense move that discourages frivolous and abusive lawsuits and redirects resources back into American jobs, innovation, and growth. Only President Trump and congressional Republicans can deliver this win for America and hold these foreign investors accountable. Contact your lawmakers today and demand they take a stand to end foreign-funded litigation abuse.
Despite the crises that we have been through, attitudes towards other people's lifestyles or other people's identities or whatever it is get more progressive over time. So that means it's more important than ever to create cultural conflict, to create the kind of crises that we see, and to create people like Trump, for example, who thrives on discord. The whole point of Trump's existence, the reason why a billionaire class was happy to bail out this guy, who I will no doubt wind up kind of they'll no doubt wind up getting burned by him, is because he creates noise, he creates chaos, he creates anarchy, and in that time, politics can, or oligarchic politics can work as it's designed to, in the kind of the expropriation of public assets and the avoidance of tax and all that sort of stuff. So from 2008 onwards, there has been this kind of recrudescence of culture wars, not because they naturally exist or they're naturally meant to exist, but because it has become the heart of right-wing politics around the world. And the reason why is because the economic offer of neoliberalism exploded in 2008, and there is nothing concrete economically that the political right can offer. In the 1980s, the credo of neoliberalism, the selling off of public assets, the breaking of union power, the privatization of the state, the injection of markets where they don't really belong or function, temporarily gives the illusion to those who benefit from it of kind of economic magic. Wow, look, this is all seems to be working. Of course, if you're a poor person and you're losing out as a result of it, or you're in an industry that's being junked as a result of it, or you are a minority group being battered off the streets as a result of it, then it's kind of less magical. But after 2008, neoliberalism, the deregulation of entire economies, the injection of markets where they don't belong, the privatization of public assets, all of this turns out to be a kind of something you can't sell anymore. If you were to do a door knocking exercise on any street in Britain and ask people if they want even more privatization, well, the last thing to privatize in Britain is the health service, and nobody is going to consent to that. Well, there might be a few, but those are people who are already so ideologically on the right that you don't need to worry about their vote. You've already got it. The offer of neoliberalism in the Western world was a one-time only thing. Once you've privatized all the council houses and you've sold all the council house stock or public housing wherever you are, you can't do it again. It was a one-time transference of wealth from the poorest to the richest, and you can't thrive on that again. this is why conservatism in Great Britain really is kind of circling the drain. It is based on, and if you look at the actual Conservative Party, who may well cease to exist at the next election, their only offer is more culture wars, more campaigning against woke. They cannot put together a meaningful economic offer, because the only thing that can make any sense really is to move leftwards, to promise people homes, to promise people to democratize ownership, to democratize wealth, to democratize power. And they don't exist to do that. That's not really the point of the Conservative Party in Britain. The second reason for conservatism's sort of demolition in Britain is because Nigel Farage's Reform Party, that speaks in sometimes openly fascistic language, and is trying to, in a sort of embarrassing, feeble way, to be aped by the Labour Party, the supposed party of at least the centre left. And the Conservatives spent many years trying to appease the extremist wing of their own party, losing the moderates, losing centre ground Conservatives that read the Times but don't kind of really want the entire welfare state to be abolished. They probably believe in various kind of nuggets about the free market and democracy and fair play and all that kind of stuff, but they don't want to see the kinds of people who would have been comfortable with the National Front in the 1970s waltzing into Downing Street. That's definitely what they don't want. In America, there's sort of the kind of the Lincoln Project, Republicans against Trump sort of group would be very similar to them. And there is in all instances in Great Britain, the Conservative Party tried to appease those extremist voters who probably, if you ask them, don't exactly really believe in democracy anyway, or they believe in democracy when they win, and they would happily tear up the welfare state if they thought it was going to disadvantage a group they particularly dislike. They're often kind of animated by these resentments, and that it was impossible to appeal to that group, because that group, firstly, was only ever a loose part of the Conservative coalition, and the electoral success of the far right, it hadn't happened before 2016. 2016 and Brexit was the far right's greatest victory. And because it hadn't happened before 2016, the far right in Britain was, as far as people who were willing to vote to get parties into power, and that's most people, was a busted flush. But now there are opportunities for the far right to flourish, and it kind of has found a home under Reform. There are schisms in Reform as characters like Rupert Lowe offer an even more extreme version of conservative or right-wing politics. So Reform's electoral coalition may well break up, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest.
Did you know that foreign investors are quietly funding lawsuits in American courts through a practice called third-party litigation funding? Shadowy overseas funders are paying to sue American companies in our courts, and they don't pay a dime in U.S. taxes if there is an award or settlement. They profit tax-free from our legal system, while U.S. companies are tied up in court, and American families pay the price, to the tune of $5,000 a year. But there is a solution. A new proposal before Congress would close this loophole and ensure these foreign investors pay taxes, just like the actual plaintiffs have to. It's a common sense move that discourages frivolous and abusive lawsuits and redirects resources back into American jobs, innovation, and growth. Only President Trump and congressional Republicans can deliver this win for America and hold these foreign investors accountable. Contact your lawmakers today and demand they take a stand to end foreign-funded litigation abuse.
We're shipping Father's Day gifts with a rapid-fire round of questions. Ready?
Yes. My gift. Can you pack it?
Yep.
Ship it.
Yes.
Guarantee it.
Of course.
Oh, send a set of golf clubs.
Oh, hole-in-one.
Protect electronics. Dog-proof it. Return it if they hate it.
Yes, no, and yeah.
Are you the UPS store?
Hey, we have a winner!
Visit the upsstore.com/guarantee for full details. Most locations are independently owned. Product services, prices, and hours of operation may vary. See Center for details. The UPS Store. Visit a store today.
That the reform that people saying that we're going to vote reform next time are generally non-voters. So people who it might be stirred out of apathy to vote for someone they believe in. They look at Nigel Farage and think, yeah, he's a good bloke, I'll vote for him. But maybe they won't be. And I think probably that's what the Labour Party are praying for, that they the reform polling, which looks very, very positive for reform at the moment, is really just a kind of like a mirage. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. The difficulty in trying to appeal to the radical end of your group is that they can always be further radicalized, and they are often radicalized in these sorts of post-truth ways. Now, the idea that there's truth and then post-truth when you're dealing with particularly Britain's media and Britain's tabloid press is laughable. You know, there has not been a truth and then a post-truth era while the Sun has existed, while the Daily Mail has existed. The extreme kind of branches of British right-wing political thought have thrived on conspiracy theories for a lot longer than simply the internet era. But now the internet era has accelerated that. And one way of looking at this is when the BBC produces news stories that would normally have been quite sympathetic towards Britain's far right. The BBC had its own sort of anti-channel crossing refugee correspondent simply to appeal to far right viewers. The suspicion on the far right is that the BBC is some kind of Marxist organisation. Why do they think that? Well, it's because when they read conspiracy theories on the internet, the idea, you know, it's called chemtrails, 5E masts, you know, vaccines, blah, 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 blah. This sort of really incoherent, crazy stuff. They ask themselves, well, why isn't that being reported on the news? And obviously because it's completely made up. And therefore their suspicion of what the news is, you know, what the suspicion is that the news is somehow part of a conspiracy to exclude this real truth, this thing that they've read about in, you know, 4chan or what have you. And therefore that further radicalizes and draws people away from a kind of an established canon of truth that states and state power tends to work on. And the attempt to appeal to this demographic drags politics further and further to the right. And the irony is that it's a small demographic. But Britain's electoral system, with its small, where elections are decided in small market towns in the Midlands and the north of England, much as the way that kind of elections in America are decided in key swing states, key battle states, means that the entire process of how you create a state and society gets utterly skewed. And so this is kind of where these questions around wokeness and this idea of political correctness gone mad, this kind of fits in. It's part of the kind of the ongoing discourse to draw politics to the right, but it has a long history. It has a long history that dates even back before the counterculture. You might even, if you listen to Mick Wright in my interview with Mick Wright the other week, look at the long history of the Daily Mail and the sort of kind of really crazy stuff that emerged at the beginning of the 20th century in trying to, again, bring out this kind of negative, suspicious, angry, resentful side to public discourse, and to divide, which is what class rule always does. So there, we must resist. Thanks very much, everybody, and I'll catch you on the next podcast, which will be sometime tomorrow, I think. All the best. Bye-bye.
Did you know that foreign investors are quietly funding lawsuits in American courts through a practice called third-party litigation funding? Shadowy overseas funders are paying to sue American companies in our courts, and they don't pay a dime in U.S. taxes if there is an award or settlement. They profit tax-free from our legal system, while U.S. companies are tied up in court and American families pay the price, to the tune of $5,000 a year. But there is a solution. A new proposal before Congress would close this loophole and ensure these foreign investors pay taxes, just like the actual plaintiffs have to. It's a common sense move that discourages frivolous and abusive lawsuits and redirects resources back into American jobs, innovation, and growth. Only President Trump and congressional Republicans can deliver this win for America and hold these foreign investors accountable. Contact your lawmakers today and demand they take a stand to end foreign-funded litigation abuse.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
Hello, American podcast listeners. Max Rushton here from The Guardian Football Weekly, which I think you should give a listen. It is good. It comes out 3 times a week, and the podcast delivers you analysis, news, both the good and the bad from the beautiful game, and maybe even the occasional laugh. He's angry about everything.
He doesn't have a great poker face, does he? I would like to play cards with Bruno Fernandes.
You can listen to The Guardian Football Weekly wherever you get your podcasts. Hopefully see you soon.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.